Imagine, a podcast series by Imagine Theatre.
Hello again, I'm Martin Ballard. Welcome to episode 8 as Imagine Theatre, one of the UK's biggest producer of pantomime and children's theatre, prepares for the return of Panto this Christmas.
For more information, go to their website at www.imaginetheatre.co.uk.
Now, as you know by now, in each episode we take you behind the scenes at Imagine Theatre to meet the people who make the company tick and some of the stars who appear in Imagine Theatre shows. This is, of course, the second episode in the second season, but don't forget all of the previous episodes are still available. Now, in episode 7, we met the actor, writer, director and producer Ian Lachlan. In this episode, I'll be talking to the man who's worked in the entertainment industry across theatres, concerts, sporting events and others all over the country for more than 34 years, almost exclusively in lighting design. He is Jamie Corbidge. How are you, Jamie?
I'm very well, Martin. Thank you very much indeed.
Okay, well, let's start at the very beginning for you because, like so many people in theatre, they start as children or teenagers, possibly operating a floating spot, for instance.
Yes, how true that is. So actually, I can go back even further than that. So we used to live in Blackpool, or Southport more specifically, and my parents used to take me every year to see the lights in Blackpool. So the first word, and my mum always tells this story, the first word I could say was lights, which is deeply ironic given the industry I spent 34 years in. And I think we used to go and see Panto in Blackpool, and then when we moved to Croydon, regular for me was going to the Wimbledon Panto, and I kind of got that taste of theatre through Panto, which is ironic. And also going to things like the big shells at Earl's Court for the military stuff and seeing those. And lighting was always the thing I wanted to do. When I had the chance, when I was living in Southampton as a young teenager, I had the chance to work with amateur theatre on the technical side. I jumped at it. In those days, it was at the old Gaumont Theatre in Southampton. And got to know the stage manager, Richard Vidler, who was still, and Eric, who was the chief electrician at that time, was still fundamental in starting me in this business. And they gave me the chance to jump on Follow Spot and start doing stuff with lighting, which was fantastic. And that was my spark. That was what I wanted to do. So, yeah.
Can you remember the first Panto you ever saw then? Would that have been in Blackpool?
I think it was Blackpool, but I was very, very, very young then. So the one I remember would have been a Cinderella at Wimbledon. And I can't remember what year it was, but it was definitely a Cinderella at Wimbledon Theatre. And I was I remember being just completely in awe of the lighting and the visuals and just the whole experience. So it was kind of Panto that started me on the theatre road, really, looking back on it. I was thinking that this morning as I was driving down here. It was it was Panto that was my spark of inspiration to going into theatre, so yeah.
But correct me if I'm wrong, in the early days when you were operating Floating Spot and starting your apprenticeship in a way, it was predominantly concerts that you were working on, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, we did a lot of stuff at the Gaumont Rock and Roll and did Follow Spot for rock and roll shows, and that sparked my interest in the music side of it. I'd done some piano training, so I'd always had an interest in music, and I thought at that point my career would go into purely musical rock and roll lighting, but I think theatre kind of dragged me over, certainly musical theatre dragged me over.
And then it turned more towards theatre, musical theatre in a way, because you did an awful lot of touring shows, didn't you?
I was mixing the rock and roll and the theatre together at that point, and it was quite a nice mix, and I've always tried to do that and keep that mix going. So that was kind of the start of my career, rock and roll and musical theatre. So it was still music, basically. It was always music that drove me at that point, so...
Yeah, I've got to ask you about one of the sort of most amazing things for me that you've done is, and I saw this at Knebworth, I think, and that's the Genesis We Can't Dance tour.
Yeah, I did the UK part of the We Can't Dance tour. In fact, I bumped into Mike Rutherford. We did a concert at Wentworth about 3 years ago, and I bumped into the team there, and it was quite nice catching up. So that was good fun. But I was a very junior person at that point. I was nothing more than a lighting tech, so much, much younger and still cutting my teeth in the industry at that point.
The happy memories, though.
Oh, very happy memories. All that period of the 80s through to the 90s, as I said, sparked by the team at the Gaumont and then the Mayflower, really drove my career at that point and made me just want to get out and do stuff. And I just threw myself into whatever came through the door, whether it was a musical tour, a relight, rock and roll, and then events started as well, which was kind of in the mid-90s as that started to creep in. So
it's funny, isn't it? All the things that you achieve later on, but you always have those memories of the early days. A friend of mine who was at the time training on a stage management course at Mount View Drama School was actually picked up and became a floating spot operator at Wembley for Live Aid, and he's done amazing things since then, but he just talks about that all the time.
It is those memories in your early career that I think are significant, and there's certainly things I remember now. I find it much harder to remember what I did last week or last month or last year than I do stuff I did 30 years ago, because there's so much crammed in now, and obviously those points your brain is less full of nonsense, I guess, so you have more capacity to remember things at that point. Nowadays it's always about budgets and money and and the serious side of the business. So
at what stage did you make that conscious decision that this was going to be a career?
I think I probably made that decision when I finished my A-levels, or was doing my A-levels. I think that was, there was a chance to go to university and I didn't want to. I just loved the industry, the feel of the industry, the feel of the people, and especially the people in the industry made it for me a place I felt very at home and very relaxed and normal, and a regular job seemed odd and strange, as we often say in theatre world and entertainment world. It's like working with the Muggles. It's not normal life. So it was very early on. I think probably in my middle to late teens I made that decision.
And what would you say was the first big break? Because it wasn't that long after that you went to the Derngate in Northampton.
Yes. So I think really it was the grounding that they gave me at the Mayflower, that Eric and Richard Vidler gave me there. Although I'd had several breaks in touring theatre and other bits and pieces, it was that grounding that sort of gave me the push. I made a decision to leave Southampton and the touring world because of relationships and other things fell into place. Moved up to Northampton and the Derngate job just came up. That was also a seminal moment in my life. A lot of things changed at that point. I bought a house. I kind of settled into a regular job rather than touring or travelling around the world. And at least for those sort of 5 years, I sort of settled down into a chief electrician role and just and stayed at Derngate. And Derngate was a really good grounding as well. I mean, I worked with a fantastic team there, probably one of at one point the best teams I think we've ever had together in the theatre world. It was just one of those perfect moments that occurs where you've got fantastic people working with you, and obviously David, who is now at Imagine, I now work with him as well, which has been great because he was nothing more than a young lad when he started at Derngate, and it's nice to see him blossom into something really good, really good.
You certainly like to diversify, don't you? And even while you're at the Derngate, I think you were still doing other things like the Rambert dance company.
Yeah, I kind of dabbled with Rambert a bit, and then I left Rambert. I left the Derngate and went freelance in 1999. That was a real diversification because I was doing stuff with Rambert, I was doing stuff at the Dome, I was doing a massive theme park in Terramitica and Benidorm. I was doing some TV stuff. I was really diversifying. So that was kind of the point. I went off in all directions and decided that actually not one area of lighting was what I wanted to do. I wanted to put my fingers in all the pies and play in all the areas. So diversification's always been my thing.
I tell you what, as well, I mean, our paths have crossed so many times. I've seen your work because I mentioned I saw Genesis at Knebworth on that tour. I actually went to Terramitica, which is a fantastic theme park in Spain, but also I went and presented a 3-hour radio programme just before it was finished and open at the Millennium Dome, which is something you were involved with.
Yeah, I'm involved in that as well. So, yes, I was involved with lighting tech, doing install stuff and supervising stuff there. And then when I went to Spain for 7 months, I came back and Jerry Singleton got me back involved with trying to keep the systems running is probably the best way of describing what our job was. Make everything function. So it wasn't really a design role, it was more of a technical role. And again, that's something else that's been important to me with diversification. There's this big argument in the business about whether you can be technical and creative at the same time, and I've always maintained you can. A lot of people will say you can't, but that's always been a key to being diversified for me as well, is I like to know technically how things are working as well as creatively how I'm going to do it.
Yeah, well, you are living proof of that. I just wondered when, you've talked about the practical experience that you've got. When did the design start to happen?
I started dabbling in proper design round about when I went freelance about 1999, and then it just kept coming, and eventually I joined Storm Lighting in 2004, and then the design thing kind of exploded because I went in as a senior designer, senior project manager, and the design thing then just spiraled even more and just grew and grew and grew. So when I left there in 2008, I already had quite a big portfolio of design stuff, so that was kind of my engine then to drive on and do more stuff since then. And it's just kept growing, and it was always a natural thing that I wanted to do. I think when I set myself out, what did I want to be, I looked at the lighting designers that I was working with when I was young, and that's where I wanted to be. I saw myself in that role. I didn't know how long it would take. I didn't know it would take 30 odd years plus to get there, but it was always where I saw myself ending up. I had a clear path in my head of where I wanted to go with it.
And for those people who don't know Storm and don't know the work, it's varied, isn't it, in all sorts of things, sporting events and so on.
Yeah, I mean, Storm, a hugely successful lighting company, and they do everything from events to theatre tours to sporting events and to very small scale shows to very, very large scale shows, including rock and roll. And they've supplied me with kit on various shows over the last 10, 12 years to an excellent standard. They're not the only supplier I use, but they are one of my favourites. So.
And now, over the years, I know you're not 120, but over the years, so much has changed. It's not so long ago that lighting was all about floods, spots, gels and gobos. LED lighting and so on has changed so much. The opportunities are incredible now, aren't they? I
think the technology has been the one thing that I found enjoyable in the last 20 years. I mean, moving lights I still have two very old Very lights set in my living room, which were early 1980s models. The technology, the ability to move light, the ability to change colour, the ability to add projection in, and now we're using complicated projection mapping. And actually, one of the projects I'm working on at the moment is to bring the XR technology, the extended reality technology, into lighting, so controlling lighting virtually as well as in the real world. And that is exciting. The ability to do this is really, it's increased our ability to be creative. It hasn't reduced it. Technology's enabled us in the lighting world to do more stuff and be more creative and to be more inventive. I always said in my head years ago, I wanted the ability to plug a USB port into my brain because I can always see what I want things to look like. In my head, I know exactly how I want something to look when I've done a brief, whether it's with a theatre show or a large event. I can see what I want. I know what I want. My frustration has always been the speed at which I can get that out of my brain into a lighting console, into a lighting rig, onto a surface. It's becoming quicker and easier all the time, which is just amazing.
And one of the most amazing things, and anybody who knows me will know I'm an absolute Disney freak. I love the Disney parks. One of the things that, if you've ever been to Magic Kingdom, for instance, in Orlando, you'll see projection mapping at its very, very best.
Yes.
In many ways, they've been leading the way, haven't they?
They have. It's great that theme parks are a big driver of this, which is fantastic. And obviously, TV's been a big driver of it as well with things like The Mandalorian. So it's great to see that the technology's been pushed. But like anything, it's like electric cars. The first one's out the gate, it's expensive and it costs a vast amount of money. But what you're seeing is that technology is now filtering down to more usable levels. And I'm hoping in the next year we're going to see some really exciting stuff, projects that I'm working on that are going to come to fruition and will prove to be, the next level of interaction with lighting and virtual reality and the real world all mixed in together, which is really exciting.
Now, it must have been a really difficult year, a tough year for you. Hopefully, we're keeping our fingers crossed that things will start to get better and better as we head towards Panto this Christmas. But how challenging has it been for you, even though now things are starting to happen again?
There's a lot of projects in the can now which are starting to show signs of changing. Yes, it was a very, very, very tough year. I mean, it's an exceptionally tough year last year. Not just for me, but for so many people in the industry. And we had, when we were allowed to, meeting people and friends and colleagues who I haven't seen for ages. And it was soul destroying what happened to the industry as a whole. I think we suffered harder than anybody, with the exception possibly of the hospitality pub industry. It was very, very, very soul destroying.
And of course, you'll know so many people because lots of actors have been outspoken, actors have been out of work. But of course, most people who work in theatre, concerts, technicians, backstage crew are all freelancers, and they struggle for so long because they just didn't get any support, did they?
I think the lack of support, Martin, was shocking. I mean, I personally had none because of various reasons. I thought I was exception. Turned out there were about 3 or 4 million of us in the end that didn't get any help at all. And again, I'm an old hand at this now, so I have a cushion and a safety net which allowed me to get through. There's a lot of youngsters in the business who haven't got that cushion and that safety net, and they have really, really struggled. You know, if they were at the start of your career, I can't imagine being at the start of my career and having this happen. I was fortunate to have a career that goes back 30 years, and when I started, things were good. We were in the booming 80s. This for the youngsters, and I've got several young guys who work on I work with and girls who have really, really struggled, and it's shocking to see what's happened. I'm hoping that is going to change soon, but how many people come back is another issue we're having at the minute, because a lot of people have left the industry, and I'm not sure they will come back. And I'm deeply concerned about going forward, new fresh blood in the theatre and entertainment industry, and how we get people back into it again, because a lot of people will say, well, it's a risky industry to be in. I'm not sure I can be in this industry. I can go and get a regular job and have security. I'm hoping the passion will drive us in a recruitment sense to get people back again.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Security is that key word, isn't it? Even before COVID-19, the industry is quite precarious anyway. There might be periods, without work for most freelancers anyway. But, to go this long without any support, and then, the uncertainty is the other key, isn't it?
It is. Uncertainty is the big thing, and I think that's been, even now, I was just talking to a stage manager friend of mine who's next door, and she was saying, we were both saying actually that I'm seeing on forums, on the social media, there's a lot of freelancers who are not yet prepared to give up their jobs working in Sainsbury's or Amazon or wherever they might be working, because there isn't enough work at the moment to sustain them, and this is a guaranteed job. And those are the people that are going to struggle as things come back, because we need it to come back in a sustained way. We need that date that says, this is it, restrictions are off, you can come back in full capacity and function as normal, and we're over this, and we have to live with it. And I think that's what we need. Theatre needs it. Television has survived okay, and it's managed to work around it, but theatre needs it. The entertainment industry needs it to come, that date to come, and to say, right, restrictions are off, we're back. And then at that point, the confidence comes back, and it's that confidence that we need at the moment back in this industry.
Let's take a little look behind the scenes then. For anybody, even people who work in theatre, may not understand the process that you have to go through as a lighting designer, from initial ideas, from initial meetings, right the way through to text and the first performance. Let's take a look at a panto, for example, Jamie. How does that work for you? How soon do you start work on it, and what's the process?
Well, it normally starts work anything up to 6 months to a year in advance, where we initially look at the concepts of the staging. That's always the first thing to look at, to how it's going to be staged, what the set is like. And then from that initial concept, in my head, I see, and not everybody works the same way, but I then see how it should look. So we go through costumes, we go through the feel of the show, we go through the script. All that takes a few months of discussions and meetings. But then at that point, I've kind of got, in my head, I can see how the show should feel, how it should look. So I build a visual in my head, and then I work backwards from that visual to achieve the result on stage. That becomes a much more technical process. Once you've got that idea in your head, you've then got to pick the right lighting units, lighting fixtures to use. You've got to look at where you can actually place them in the space and how they fit. And then you work backwards from that again, and you work out what you need to do to power it and make it all work, and how you program it. So it's kind of a reverse engineering from the creative concept, the idea in your head. You then reverse engineer the whole thing back to build the structure and build the lighting rig. It's very much the way I guess architecture works as well, where you have, you come up with the creative idea. This is how it's going to look. This is what we want. How do we then feed that back down the line to actually build it and make it work?
Because it's a mix in so many ways of variety, musical theatre, rock and roll, dance. Your imagination has free rein. The only real restrictions and limitations are budgets, aren't they?
I think, yes, budgets and time. The two things in this industry that I have learned over the last X number of years are money can be a problem and time is a problem. And I think time is probably more of a problem than money sometimes, because turnarounds can be incredibly fast. Things change on the hoof in a live situation very quickly, and you've got to think on your feet. And I think time and money are the two things that are my, not enemy, but they're the two biggest challenges you have to face. Because you're right, creativity, I can come up with anything. I can vision anything in my head, but at some point the money's going to run out, or the time to do it is going to run out.
Yeah, and it's worth mentioning as well. We talked about how technology has changed generally. You were involved in what was a really innovative pantomime at the Fairfield Halls in Croydon, which was, innovative in so many ways, because the venue wasn't a theatre. You had to come up with, new ideas, think outside the box, and that must have been really exciting.
It was incredibly exciting, especially working with Nina and the video side of things. But the building was a phenomenal challenge because it wasn't a traditional professional arts theatre. So trying to do it in a concert hall was an uphill struggle in terms of the infrastructure of the building. It's a new building as well, a refurbished building, which we had presented its own challenges in its own way. But it's still exciting to do it, and it's still exciting to get that challenge because it gives you that energy. The challenge is what gives you the energy, and I think that gives you the passion as well. So sometimes even when you look at it and go, oh God, this is going to be a nightmare, that challenge is you can turn it into a positive thing. You can make it become a really positive thing and go, actually, it's a big challenge, but we're going to do this. We're going to do something that's going to blow people's socks off and do something that's never been done before in a space that you wouldn't normally perhaps choose to do it in. I don't mind. I like the challenge of that. It's a good thing.
So where are you now then? Because obviously we know that restrictions and the lifting of them completely has been postponed. Fingers crossed that will actually happen in July. And then where do you go from here? Because a lot of companies are in limbo, aren't they? They're not really sure what sort of plans to make. I know that a lot of production companies, for Panto for example, have 2 or 3 scenarios that they're planning for.
Yeah, I think a lot of companies that I'm doing pitches for and stuff are very much in limbo. A lot of it is looking ahead and saying what's going to happen in September, October, November, December. We hope it's going to be positive. We hope that things are going to be good. We hope there's good news on the 19th of July and everything gets released. So at the minute, we are still in this sort of no man's land, as I describe it to people when I get phone calls saying, have you got any work coming up? Have you got anything for me? I say we're kind of in a no man's land for the next 4 weeks until we get to that date. And then I think things will start to solidify. There's lots of things on the table. There's lots of people wanting to do things and lots of inquiries, but no one's prepared to put their head yet above the parapet, and hence think many of the production companies have got 3 or 4 different scenarios on the table in case they go one way or in case they go the other way. And I think that's a sensible approach at the moment, but obviously no one's making decisions. No one's signing the check to say, right, we're doing this, we're going to go and do this. I think we've got to wait until we get to the 19th and see where we stand then. And I do genuinely believe at that point the floodgates will open. I was discussing with the guys at Imagine, saying I think that if we're allowed to do the pantos properly without social distancing, we will have an incredibly successful season in terms of audience numbers, because people will be so desperate to go out and see shows and do things and socialise. It will be a very successful end to the year, and we're praying that we get to that point.
I've been asking all of the guests on the Just Imagine podcast the same 3 questions at the end. The first one, Jamie, I maybe think about this from a lighting perspective. Which one do you enjoy the most as a lighting designer? What's your favourite title?
Absolutely, no doubt. When I saw you sent this through and said, what do you think? Cinderella every time. And I don't know why. I was analysing it driving down here this morning and trying to think why. I think it's because it's the transformation stuff that's really magical in it for me, for lighting. And it's got moments that are comic, and it's got moments that have got farce, but it's also got the magical moments in it. And I love the story. I think it's a really nice rags to riches story. It's a nice, pleasant show to do, and particularly because you've got those creative, the going into the ball, the transformation. That's all really magical, and I love that magical bit. It's great.
Yeah, I think you mentioned at the beginning that was probably the first one you ever saw.
Yes, it's the first one I remember seeing. I'm trying to remember the cast. I will have to go back and check this, but I'm trying to remember it'll be back in 1970 something. So it's a long time ago. But I think Cinderella was the first one that I saw, and I've always enjoyed doing Cinderella as a show to light. It's just magical.
When working on shows, not necessarily as a lighting designer, but, back maybe in a concert or in a capacity, working in those early days as a floating spot, whatever, when was it not all right on the night and everything went a bit pear-shaped?
I've been thinking about this quite carefully and thinking, what stories can I actually tell? Because I've heard many podcasts in the last year where people have gone, oh yeah, I can't tell that story. We had an incident, and I think I can say this comfortably now because it's over 20 years ago, but we were doing a panto. I won't name the panto, and I won't name the venue or the people, but we were doing a panto, and there was a sequence in it where there were false offstage gunshots fired as a false thing. And through a variety of very strange and peculiar circumstances, the blank bullets in one of these guns ended up being training CS gas bullets.
Oh no.
And we ended up stopping the show. The company manager had to run on stage mid-show, stopped the show because the orchestra had been gassed and the first 4 rows of the audience had a healthy dose of CS gas. I think that to this day is one of the most memorable, dramatic moments I can remember. There's a lot of story around it, but it was a dramatic moment. There's many more, but I'm very careful what I say because some of them are not suitable for NSFW, as they say.
Well, yeah. Do you know, I've said to so many guests on the podcast as well, they were certainly not funny at the time, and that must have been quite traumatic.
Oh, no.
But it takes 20 years to be able to laugh about it, doesn't it?
Like so many of the things I look back now in the last 30 odd years that have happened, and some of them at the time were horrendous, and you wish the ground would open up and swallow you. But when you, with hindsight, as it becomes more comic, these moments can be laughed about, and I think that's one of the good things. What I do find myself doing now is increasingly telling the younger generation stories about what happened, because they went, oh, please tell us about when so and so, or when you met so and so, when this happened and this happened, and you're like, God, I've turned into that person that I never wanted to be, that just told anecdotes about my life in the business. But yeah, I guess you get to an age where that just has you just accept it gracefully and go, yeah, fair enough, okay.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they wouldn't understand most of it. If you said I was up a cherry picker changing gels, they'd what?
Yeah.
What's all that about?
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's the mobile phone thing. You just go to a phone box and dial up and make phone calls. Yeah, no, we used to do that. You used to manually change the channels on the television. Yeah, we had to do that. Yeah.
So, of all the pantos, that you've seen, you obviously love them all for whatever reason. Cinderella may be your favourite, but why overall is panto so special, do you think, for you?
I think it's because it's a bit of everything. So I think it's got the physicality, it's got comedy, you've got cross-dressing, which is a long tradition in panto. You have a massively broad audience that come and see pantos. I love sitting on the first night and seeing the audience come in and seeing that you've got grandmas and kids and granddads, and then you've got younger generations and teenagers, and it's a huge, broad spectrum of people come and see it. It's also a tradition. It's that thing that you do at Christmas that just feels like something that lifts your spirit and is happy and enjoyable, and it's fairy tale like. It's also providing escapism at a time of the year when the evenings are dark and the weather's miserable and people are like, ooh. So yeah, I think it's all of those things. I love the physicality of it. I love the fact that you get the comedy and you get magical moments, but you also get farce. So you go straight from a really dramatic scene of something happening into something quite farcical and comedic. And I think also I've been very privileged to work with some amazing people over the years on panto in terms of the cast. So lucky. Without exception, I don't think any of them have ever been any bad eggs in the bag. And when you go back and revisit it, it's been a thoroughly enjoyable experience. The whole panto thing is it's making magic at a time of year when things are a bit dark and a bit miserable, weather's a bit rubbish. Just before Christmas, it lifts people's spirits. And
from your point of view, are your days of working on pantos over now once you've designed it and done the tech and dress? Are you back home?
Sadly, they are. I think nowadays, it sounds like a really silly thing to say, but the further up the tree you go, the more you become detached from the day-to-day stuff on shows. Once you've finished your role as a designer, you've done your bit and you tend to walk away and leave it. I find it hard because I miss the people, because even over rehearsals you build up a great camaraderie with the cast and the crew, and actually then you after the second night you normally end up walking away and leaving it. You might come back and revisit it, but yeah, I think unfortunately my days of operating shows are rapidly disappearing out the window, sadly.
And it's certainly something that you miss, isn't it? That whole buzz, the company spirit, and so on.
Yeah, it's the live feel of it. I think that's the thing that is the people say to me, why don't you do a lot of TV? And live shows for me have always been where it's at. I want the hairs on the back of my neck to stand up at the end of a show and feel that audience going, clapping and cheering, and that is the most important thing for me. That's what makes it all worthwhile. You get that at the end of the day, you see those people enjoying that show, and you go, yeah, this is why I do this, because there's 1,000, 2,000 people walking out who've enjoyed themselves, and that makes you feel what you do is actually worthwhile.
Well, listen, we wish you all the very best, and let's hope, fingers crossed, that things can open up and Panto does go forward as we know it. It may not be exactly as it has been in previous years. It depends on social distancing and all sorts of other things. Yeah. But let's hope that we can go full steam ahead. Jamie, have a great year ahead, and thank you so much for talking to us.
Martin, thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Next time, I'll be chatting to the Copenhagen-based theatre director and writer with more than 25 years of theatre experience, Janice Dunn. Now, don't forget you can subscribe through your favourite podcast app so you don't miss any future episodes, and all of the previous episodes are still available to download. Above all, make sure you join me, Martin Ballard, next time for episode 9.
Thank you for listening to the latest edition of Just Imagine, the podcast series from Imagine Theatre. And you can find out more by going to www.imaginetheatre.co.uk.